Welcome to the Made in Bloomsbury podcast. I'm here with Rob. Hi, Rob.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome and thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Rob, can you tell our audience roughly what you do, what you've been up to, and who you are?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm one of the co-founders and chief impact officer at Pinwheel. We're a sustainability startup that enables our clients to fund planet repairing projects around the world under a contribution model as a sort of alternative to offsetting. And I'll explain more about that, I'm sure. My background is as a policy person in climate and energy policy. I used to be a civil servant in government and was in government around the same time as you. I remember that.
Yeah,
And went on to then become policy and communications director at Smart Energy GB, which is a UK national net zero campaign. And yeah, and then from there set up Pinwheel with my co-founder, looking to see how we can come up with a better model than the carbon offset model.
nice. Sounds very exciting. And yes, we were at the same place at the same time at some point, and it's very nice and interesting and very cool to see how far you've come. So tell us. I mean, it's an inspiration for me personally, and hopefully inspiration to our audience. And can you tell us what inspires you to do what you do?
So I mean, firstly, it's climate and biodiversity. So I've spent my entire career, except for a couple of years in the civil service when I was moving around, always working on energy and climate change policy, and that is my life's work, I guess, and the thing that I'll be doing until I retire, and it's sort of the only thing I'm interested in. But then it's just policy challenges generally, and I know, you've had lots of entrepreneurs on this podcast, and I guess as one of the co-founders of Pinwheel, I'm probably ought to claim that I'm an entrepreneur, but I don't feel like one. I feel like a policy person, and Pinwheel is a vehicle to try and come up with a real version of a policy answer to how can corporates fund projects well? How can they get the credit for doing so without greenwash, without green hush? And so, yeah, it just feels like a fun extension to being a policy nerd in the world of climate.
Nice. We do appreciate the entrepreneurial spirit on this podcast, and you definitely have it. And so I'm interested actually about Pinwheel. So you've been, as in Pinwheel, has been advocating for beyond the value chain mitigation as an alternative to carbon offsetting. So what is that, and why do you think that is the right model?
Yeah, so when we first set out to do Pinwheel, in a way, we didn't really mean to quite fully get into this market, at least not initially. But and we came from a bit of an energy background to an extent, and but as we looked at, well, what do you do with energy you can't turn into renewable straight away, or
Mm.
with heat pumps? What would you do? And we looked at, well, would you do offsetting for that? And that led us to really look at the carbon offset market and see that it was fundamentally broken in two ways. The first way was that it just didn't work from an integrity perspective. The carbon credits that exist in the market cannot guarantee to deliver a metric ton of carbon. And then any claim off the back of that, that's a kind of binary absolute claim like carbon neutral, is inherently then a really significant risk of greenwash. But also, the money wasn't necessarily going to the most impactful projects. The market mechanism was constantly driving down prices, as most markets do trend towards. But that meant lower quality projects were coming forward, and the whole thing was starting to kind of collapse under the weight of itself. But then on the buyer side, the companies that were doing it, all they could do with that was make that narrow claim, like carbon neutral. And from having done kind of communications before that, and my co-founder is a marketer, we went, this is rubbish. This is companies are spending lots of money, in many cases millions of pounds, on these projects. They're then having to work out how you communicate this, and the only thing that you get is this certificate. So, and all of the magic that lived in the projects, whether that's restoring or protecting forests, or if it's blue carbon seagrass, or even renewables, none of the storytelling, none of the magic, none of the humanity was coming through. So it was a really bad product to buy, and it also wasn't working for the planet. And what Beyond Value Chain Mitigation does is it enables you to fund a broader set of projects and do so under a contribution model. And essentially, what I mean by the contribution model is it asks the question, with whatever resources I've got, what can I best fund with that to make impact for the planet? Rather than how do I compensate for my own harm? how do I accumulate as many carbon credits as I can? And that then opens up the field of possibilities. You can look at novel carbon removal that sequesters carbon for thousands of years, or you can look at oceans, and you can even look beyond carbon to biodiversity, keystone species, and lots of other projects that are A, much more engaging, but B, potentially better for the planet. And so we were promoting this contribution approach since we started in 2021. And over that time, then WWF have come up behind it. Gold Standard has. The Science Based Target Initiative then came up with this Beyond Value Chain Mitigation acronym that essentially is the same model. And Carbon Market Watch have come up behind it as well. So now there is this vanguard of most really of the opinion formers in this space saying, instead of offsetting and making a compensation claim, come up with the right way of taking responsibility for your emissions and your impact on the planet. And that could be under a contribution model, and you can be much more innovative in which projects you fund and therefore make more impact for the planet, but also do a better job for your brand.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That sounds very interesting and quite technical as well. And it's got me thinking of the technicalities of offsets versus avoidances and all of these other terminologies, allowances, which I've heavily specialized in. I actually had one client recently ask me, or he framed carbon avoidance as an offset. He essentially wanted to embed some kind of crypto against coal that hasn't been mined yet. And I thought, that's definitely, I don't know what you think, but that's definitely an avoidance and not an offset, right? And it's got me thinking, why doesn't offsetting work? What conditions do you think we need or exist for an offset to be robust?
Yeah, and I think if you're really pure on this, and Owen Hewlett, who's the chief technical officer at Gold Standard, would say it's fundamentally a category error to have your own value chain, your own emissions, and then to take something from entirely outside of your value chain and try and count them off against each other. So his answer would potentially be as high level as that and say, it's a category error, and generally the public and stakeholders more broadly smell a rat and don't like it. And certainly the Advertising Standard Authority, when it did its research on what consumers think, saw that consumers got actually angry when they realized that a claim like carbon neutral or net zero had been underpinned by offsets. So it certainly never does anyone any good. But on the hyper technical side, if you just kind of go back to almost first principles, what is it that happens when you emit a ton of carbon equivalent? Well, it goes into the atmosphere, and it's the average of that ton is in the atmosphere for around 1,000 years. So something to be a technically robust offset, it would need to remove that carbon for 1,000 years or more. And there are basically almost no projects in the world that actually do that, certainly not at scale. It would obviously need to meet the same standards that carbon credits currently do in terms of real, additional, verifiable, and verified.
Hmm.
You'd probably need it to be insurance backed because, clearly in year 600, if that carbon removal was reversed for some reason, you would need to rebuy it, after many generations of Cheesewrights and testers are no longer around. And then you would also probably need a corresponding adjustment, because one of the things that the offset market hasn't quite got to grips with, although Article 6 at the last COP is starting to tackle this, is if I, as a company, buy a carbon credit and make an offset, but that there isn't a corresponding adjustment attached at kind of global level, all you've done is enable that country to meet its nationally determined contribution easier. And because there's a massive ambition gap, all of the commitments that every country has made put together still don't take us to, certainly not below 1.5 degrees. All you're actually doing is you're not reducing an additional ton of carbon in the atmosphere. So when you create that kind of semi-purist technical view of what an offset has to be in terms of a genuine removal for 1,000 years or more, probably insurance backed, etc., etc., you've created an impossible standard. It just doesn't exist. The markets don't exist, and if they did, it would be prohibitively expensive. So, kind of whether you take a kind of philosophical approach or a practical approach, you can't really get a technically robust offset that will enable a company to go, we are definitely carbon neutral or net zero as a result of having done this. And and therefore any brand that does it's just taking a huge risk. And as I said at the top, really, they're not going to be able to get any real brand value or marketing value out of having done it. So it also just feels wasteful.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds very innovative, Rob. I'm very impressed. And speaking of brands and companies, um, why are companies switching to this new model? And the ones that have done it, what results are they seeing?
So I think partly because they've understood challenges with offsetting, and so they've been looking for a new model. And we've sort of seen two reactions in the market. One is to almost take flight from the market entirely, which is unhelpful, but I understand why it happens. But the other one then has to be, well, what is the alternative? And so partly of it is sustainability directors and chief sustainability officers getting an understanding of these technical issues. But on the other side, it is often people have come to us, and it's often the marketing teams that come to us because they've seen that actually, if you can bring together a portfolio of really impactful, engaging projects, you know, keystone species protection, sea turtle hatchlings, for instance, alongside maybe seagrass or novel carbon removal, and bring that together in a portfolio, you can create so many opportunities for content and storytelling that make it possible to not just make this a tax, but something that drives sales. So, one of the tools we've got enables stakeholders to vote on where the money goes. So, one of the big brands we work with is called HH Global. They're a big marketing services company. And what they did for Earth Day last year is they gave all of their staff in 60 countries, thousands of staff, a vote on where their sustainability funding went. It was Plastics Earth Day. So one of the projects that each region had was plastics, but in each of the regions, South America, North America, APAC, and EMEA, they had a different project portfolio from the projects that Pinwheel offers. And they got the best ever staff engagement on any issue they've ever had, ever. They had huge amount of voting, huge amount of people talking about it, engaging with it. And as a result, they created a massive increase in the climate literacy they've got in the organization. But everyone then understood that HH Global was funding these projects rather than, if they'd have just sent emails saying, by the way, guys, we've created this budget and we've done it, you forget it. You forget what you're told, but you remember when you get your opinion asked. So they just had amazing, amazing results. And we're also seeing brands put this into procurement. So as many listeners, particularly if they've done procurement before, will know, up to about 20% of the marks in some procurement can be for sustainability. So if you can put into, the pitch, if you work with us, we will put X% of our fees into the sustainability fund, and your staff or your customers can vote on the projects. It creates a real wow moment in that pitch, and it means you win those sustainability marks. And so some of our clients have actually started to win big accounts and big clients off the back of a beyond value chain mitigation strategy working with us.
Wow. Okay. Sounds very interesting. For those of you who are interested, you can find Rob on LinkedIn. And do you have any other socials that maybe people could reach out to if they've got any questions?
I'm on Blue Sky these days. I've ditched X or Twitter, and my
Okay.
name, Rob Cheesewright. I'm very easy to find. If you Google me, you will only find one. We're on LinkedIn and obviously our website, pinwheel.earth.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.